The Arizona sun did not merely shine. It struck. It hammered down upon the red earth with the weight of a blacksmith's anvil, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of heat that distorted the horizon. Here, in the vast, open throat of the territory, the silence was heavy, broken only by the mournful, high-pitched yip of a coyote somewhere in the distant sandstone buttes and the rhythmic, grinding protest of the stagecoach wheels. Inside the coach, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of old leather, dust, and the stale sweat of travel. Lillian Hart pressed a handkerchief to her nose, though the white lace had long since turned a dingy shade of brown. She was 25 years old, a woman grown, yet she felt as small and trapped as a child locked in a cellar. She looked out the window. The landscape was alien to her Philadelphia eyes. There were no green manicured lawns here, no cobblestone streets, no polite shade of elm trees. There was only red rock, jagged and bleeding against the deep blue sky, and sagebrush that clung to the dry earth like desperate claws. It was a violent land, and she was riding straight into the heart of it to sell her soul. Lily looked down at the letter in her lap. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded 100 times since she had crossed the Mississippi River. It was from her father. The handwriting was shaky, the ink blotchy, the words of a man who had gambled everything and lost. My dearest Lily, it read, Mr. Rourke is a man of significant means. He has been generous enough to absorb the debts. The foreclosure on the house has been halted, but only on the promise of this union. You must understand, child, there was no other way. He needs a breeding wife and we need salvation. Salvation, Lily scoffed, a dry, bitter sound that was lost under the rumble of the coach. He called it salvation. She called it a transaction. She was the payment for a debt she had not incurred. Shipped across the country like a crate of dry goods to a man named Charles Rourke in a town called Red Mesa. A heavy jolt of the carriage threw her against the wooden wall. She winced, straightening her hat, but her hand drifted from the letter to the heavy leather satchel resting by her feet. Her grip on the handle tightened until her knuckles turned white. If her father thought she was merely a dutiful daughter coming to be a lamb at the slaughter, he was mistaken. She worked the latch of the satchel and peered inside, just to reassure herself that the documents were still there. Underneath her spare dress and a Bible lay a stack of papers she had stolen from her father's study 3 weeks ago. They were not love letters. They were land surveys. Lily had spent 5 years working as her father's legal assistant, hidden in the back room while the men smoked cigars and discussed business. She knew how to read a contract. She knew how to trace a survey line. And she knew fraud when she saw it. The papers in her bag were proof damning. Undeniable proof that the 40,000 acres Charles Rourke claimed for his cattle ranch did not belong to the government to sell. They belonged to the Navajo. The survey lines had been deliberately redrawn, water rights erased, and treaties ignored. Rourke was not just a rancher. He was a thief on a grand scale, leveraging the confusion of the railroad expansion to steal an entire valley. Lily snapped the bag shut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp anger. She was not going to Red Mesa to marry Charles Rourke. She was going to walk into his office, slam these papers on his desk, and threaten to expose his fraud to the federal marshals unless he cleared her family's debt and returned the land to its rightful owners. It was a naive plan, perhaps a dangerous plan, certainly, but it was the only weapon she had. She would not be a victim. If this wild, brutal land wanted a fight, she would give it one. High above the canyon floor, on a ridge of sandstone that jutted out like the prow of a ship, Cain Yazzie watched the stagecoach. To the untrained eye, he would have been invisible. He wore a shirt of faded calico and trousers of rough wool, blending seamlessly with the shadows of the rock. His black hair was tied back, kept from his eyes by a band of red cloth. He sat astride a roan mustang that stood as still as a statue, both man and beast breathing in the dry, hot air of the high desert. Cain narrowed his eyes. The coach was a tiny black beetle crawling along the ribbon of dust that the white men called a road. It was heading toward Red Mesa. Another load of supplies, he thought bitterly. Another load of barbed wire to cut the earth, or whiskey to poison the spirit. Or perhaps more men with heavy boots and pieces of paper claiming they owned the sky and the dirt. He shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking softly. He was 30 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the hardness of his jaw made him look older. He had lived through enough for 3 lifetimes. The memory hit him then, unbidden, as it often did when he looked out over the valley that should have been green with corn, but was now dotted with Rourke's cattle. He remembered the long walk. It had been more than 20 years ago, but the cold still lived in his bones. He remembered the soldiers with their blue coats and bayonets. He remembered the burning of the peach trees in the Canyon de Chelly. He remembered the march 300 miles of misery to the Bosque Redondo. He had been a boy then, but he had learned the lesson of the white man's world well. They did not want neighbors. They wanted ghosts. He had watched his grandmother die in the mud of the Pecos River, too weak to take another step. He had watched the spirit drain from his father's eyes. Cain touched the rifle's scabbard at his knee. Never again. He had returned. The people the Dane had returned. But the war was not over. It had just changed shape. It was no longer fought with cannons, but with lawyers and fences and men like Charles Rourke who smiled while they cut your throat. He kept his eyes on the coach. He was not a guardian of these intruders. Let them come. Let the desert break them. But his instincts, honed by years of scouting for the very army that had once imprisoned him, pricked at the back of his neck. Something was wrong. The coach was moving too slowly, and the wind, shifting from the west, carried a sound that did not belong. It was not the wind in the sage, it was the rhythm of galloping hooves. Not the steady trot of the coach team, but the frantic, driving beat of riders pushing their mounts hard. Cain looked back, tracing the road miles behind the coach. A cloud of dust was rising there, separate from the one the coach left in its wake. 6 men, maybe 7. They were riding fast, closing the distance. Cain felt a muscle in his jaw jump. If they were bandits, it was none of his business. White men robbing white men was a snake eating its own tail. But here, on the edge of the reservation land, nothing was ever that simple. If a coach was attacked here, the blame would not fall on bandits. It would fall on the Navajo. He tightened his grip on the reins. He could turn his horse around. He could ride back to the Hogan, to the safety of the deep canyons where his sister Ada was grinding corn. He could let the world burn, but he did not turn. He sat on the edge of the precipice, a silent sentinel, and watched the tragedy unfold. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky bruised with streaks of purple and blood orange. By the time the lamps were lit in the Red Mesa saloon, the air inside was thick enough to chew. It smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and the unwashed bodies of miners and cattlemen. In a circular booth at the back, shadowed by the curve of the staircase, 2 men sat with a bottle of expensive whiskey between them. Charles Rourke was a handsome man in the way a polished knife is handsome. He wore a suit of gray wool that cost more than most men in the room earned in 5 years. His hands were clean, his fingernails manicured. He poured a glass for the man across from him, his movements smooth and practiced. "Drink up, Marshal," Rourke said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone that masked the venom beneath. "It is going to be a long night." Marshal Boone wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve. He was a large man, his belly straining against the buttons of his vest, his face flushed with heat and liquor. He took the glass, his hand trembling slightly. "You are sure about this, Charles?" Boone asked, glancing around the room nervously. "Stopping a coach is one thing, but a massacre, the army will come down hard." "That is exactly the point, you fool," Rourke said, sipping his whiskey. "The army is sluggish. They need a reason to move. They need outrage." Rourke leaned forward, the lamplight reflecting in his pale, cold eyes. "The treaty lines are holding up my expansion. The courts are slow. I need those savages off the northern pasture, and I need them off now. If the public believes the Navajo have broken the peace, if they believe a war party slaughtered an innocent white woman traveling to her wedding, the governor will have no choice. He will send the cavalry to clear the valley once and for all. Boone swallowed the whiskey in one gulp. And the girl Miss Hart? Rourke shrugged, as if discussing a head of cattle that had become lame. Collateral damage. She is your fiancé, Charles, Boone hissed. She is coming here to marry you. She is coming here because her father owes me money, Rourke corrected him, his voice devoid of emotion. I have never met the girl. I have seen a tintype picture. She looks plain, but more importantly, she brings the deed transfer documents with her. Her father signed them in Philadelphia. That is all I need. The marriage was just a formality to ensure the legality of the asset transfer. He paused, a cruel smile touching the corners of his lips. In fact, a grieving widower garners much more sympathy than a new husband. If she dies in a tragic Indian attack, I get the land, I get the sympathy of the town, and I get the army to remove the Navajo. It is a win on every count. And the Red Mesa Riders? Boone asked. They know what to do. They have been paid well, Rourke said. They are wearing moccasins. They will use arrows for the first volley. They will leave behind a few trinkets, feathers, beaded leather just to make sure the evidence is clear. By tomorrow morning, the story will be written in blood. Rourke poured another drink. Relax. Marshal, history is written by the men who are willing to do what is necessary. We are just helping destiny along. Boone looked into his glass, guilt warring with greed in his watery eyes. Greed won. He nodded slowly. And if anyone survives, no one survives, Rourke said softly. Make sure of that. The twilight deepened into the indigo of early night. The desert cooled rapidly, the heat radiating off the rocks and vanishing into the thin air. Inside the stagecoach, Lily shivered. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The coach driver had lit the lanterns, and they cast long, dancing shadows against the canyon walls as they passed. The world outside felt close, oppressive. She clutched the satchel to her chest. Every bump in the road made her jump. She had a terrible feeling, a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with the motion of the carriage. It was too quiet. The driver had stopped singing hours ago. Suddenly, the coach lurched violently to the left. Lily gasped, grabbing the window frame to steady herself. "Driver," she called out, "is everything all right?" There was no answer, just the crack of the whip and the frantic increase in the horse's pace. The carriage was moving faster now, recklessly fast. Lily leaned out the window, the wind whipping her hair into her face. "Driver." Then she heard it. It was not a coyote. It was the sharp, cracking thunder of a rifle shot. From his vantage point on the cliff, Kane watched the scene below with a grim inevitability. The stagecoach had entered the narrowest part of the pass, a place the locals called the Devil's Throat. It was the perfect kill zone. High walls on both sides, loose shale underfoot. The second dust cloud had caught up. Kane raised his binoculars, a battered pair he had taken from a dead Confederate officer years ago. Through the lenses, he saw them. 7 riders. They were wearing dusters to hide their clothes, but Kane could see the moonlight glinting off their repeating rifles. They were not Navajo. They rode heavy quarter horses, not the smaller, agile ponies of the tribes. They sat in their saddles like white men, heavy and stiff. But as they closed in, Kane saw the detail that made his blood run cold. They were whooping. They were making high, ululating cries, mimicking the war cries of the Apache and the Navajo. One of them raised a bow and fired a flaming arrow. It arced through the night sky, a streak of orange fire, and slammed into the side of the stagecoach. It was a theater, deadly, brutal theater. "Cowards," Kane whispered into the wind. He saw the driver of the coach slump forward, hit by a bullet. The reins went loose. The team of horses screamed, panic taking over as the coach careened dangerously close to the edge of the wash. Kane knew he should stay put. He knew the smart thing, the survival thing, was to let the white men kill each other. If he rode down there, he would be blamed. A Navajo warrior at the scene of a massacre. He would hang before he could speak a word of defense. But then he saw the door of the careening coach fly open. A woman leaned out. Even from this distance, He could see the pale oval of her face and the dark mass of her hair. She did not look like a woman fainting. She looked like a woman fighting. She was holding something, a pistol, small and silver, and she fired back at the shadows pursuing her. A spark of surprise lit in Kane's chest. She was not cowering on the floorboards. The lead rider drew closer, leveling his rifle at the open door. Kane did not think. The time for thinking had passed with the setting sun. The ancient obligation of the warrior to protect the helpless, to fight the lie surged through him, overriding years of caution. He dug his heels into the flanks of his Mustang. "Haguni," he whispered. "Let it be so." He guided the horse to the steep, treacherous trail that cut down the face of the cliff. It was a path no white man would attempt in the daylight, let alone the dark. But Kane and his horse were on this rock. They poured over the edge like a rock slide, plunging down into the darkness, racing toward the fire and the screams below. The ambush had begun, and the witness had just become a participant. The impact was a bone-jarring collision of wood against stone. The stagecoach did not merely stop. It disintegrated. The front axle shattered with a scream of tortured metal, and the carriage cartwheeled onto its side, sliding through the gravel in a shower of sparks before slamming into the canyon wall. Inside, the world became a violent kaleidoscope of darkness and pain. Lillian Hart felt the breath leave her lungs as her shoulder struck the doorframe. Luggage rained down from the roof, heavy trunks smashing into the earth with the sound of breaking bones. Then came the silence, brief and ringing, followed immediately by the crackle of flames and the screams of the horses. Lily gasped, the air thick with dust and the acrid stench of black powder. She was alive. She lay tangled in her skirts on what was now the floor of the coach. The side panel cracked open to the night sky. "Is anyone there?" she choked out, pushing a heavy carpet bag off her legs. A moan answered her. In the dim light of the flickering carriage lamps, she saw the woman who had sat opposite her, a young mother named Sarah, traveling to meet her husband in Santa Fe. Sarah was slumped against the crushed roof, her eyes wide and glassy, a dark stain spreading across the front of her calico dress. She was not moving, but beneath her arm, tucked partially under the seat, her 5-year-old son, Toby, was whimpering. "Mama?" the boy whispered. Lily did not think. The terror that had frozen her heart shattered under a surge of desperate instinct. She scrambled over the debris, glass slicing into her palms. "Come here, Toby," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "We have to move, now." Outside, the night erupted again. High, trilling war cries pierced the air, a terrifying, unnatural sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Arrows thudded into the wood of the coach, the shafts vibrating with the force of impact. One arrow punched through the thin wall inches from Lily's face. It was tipped with fire. Lily grabbed the boy by his collar and dragged him toward the shattered window. The heat was rising. The oil from the lamps had spilled, and flames were licking greedily at the dry wood of the carriage. "Run to the rocks," she hissed to the boy, shoving him through the opening. "Do not look back." As she pushed herself up to follow, she felt the cold weight of the Derringer pistol strapped to her thigh beneath her skirts. Her father had given it to her with a laugh, calling it a toy. She ripped the skirt fabric, her fingers fumbling until they closed around the pearl handle. It held only 2 shots. It was a toy against rifles, but it was all she had. She tumbled out of the wreckage into the dirt. The heat of the burning coach seared her back. She looked for Toby. The boy was 10 feet away, frozen, staring at the circle of riders emerging from the darkness. They were grotesque silhouettes against the moonlight. 7 men on horseback, circling like vultures. They wore buckskins and feathers, but the feathers were stuck haphazardly into hat bands, and the paint on their faces was crude grease. One of them raised a repeating rifle, not a bow, and aimed it at the boy. "No!" Lily screamed. She raised her tiny pistol and fired. The shot was a pathetic pop in the roaring chaos. It went wide, hitting the dirt yards from the rider. The man laughed, a rough, guttural sound that sounded nothing like the language of the tribes. He levered his rifle, but before he could pull the trigger, his head snapped back. A heavy boom thundered from the darkness above, not the crack of a Winchester, but the deep roar of a buffalo gun. The rider tumbled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The laughter cut off instantly. The other riders yanked their reins, their horses rearing in confusion. They spun around, searching the cliffs. "Who fired that?" one shouted in English. "I thought you said the area was clear." From the shadows of the scree slope, a demon emerged. It was a horse and rider, sliding down the steep embankment in a cloud of shale and dust. The rider did not stop. He hit the flat ground at a gallop, guiding his Mustang with his knees, his hands working the lever of a rifle with terrifying speed. Kane Yazzie did not yell. He did not whoop. He rode with the silent, deadly focus of a man clearing a field of predators. He fired again, and a second rider clutched his shoulder, dropping his weapon. "It is a trap," someone screamed. "Pull back. Get to the marshal." The assailants, hired bullies and actors who expected only easy prey, broke formation. The illusion of the Indian attack dissolved into panic. They spurred their heavy quarter horses, turning tail and fleeing back down the road toward Red Mesa, leaving their dead companion and the burning wreckage behind. Kane slowed his Mustang, the horse huffing in the cool night air. He kept his rifle raised, scanning the darkness for stragglers. When the last hoofbeat faded, he dismounted. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The coach was fully engulfed now, a pyre in the middle of the desert. Kane walked toward the wreckage. His boots crunched on the gravel. He saw the body of the rider he had shot, a white man with boot polish smeared on his cheeks. He stepped over him with a sneer of disgust and moved toward the figures on the ground. Lily was kneeling in the dirt. She was covered in soot, her expensive traveling dress torn at the shoulder, her hair wild and loose. She was rocking back and forth, holding the boy, Toby, tight against her chest. Kane approached slowly, lowering his rifle but keeping it ready. "Ma'am?" Lily's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, white-rimmed with shock. In the firelight, she saw a tall, dark-skinned man with long black hair, a rifle in his hand, and a streak of red ochre across his cheekbone, the mark of the very people she believed had just murdered her companions. She did not see a savior. She saw the enemy. With a cry of rage, she dropped the boy and scrambled backward, raising the empty derringer with a shaking hand. "Stay back!" she screamed. Kane stopped. He held up a hand, palm out. "Put the gun down. It is empty." "I said stay back." Lily's voice broke. She looked down at the boy. Toby was not moving. A dark stain had spread across the back of his small shirt, a stray bullet from the initial volley, or perhaps the fall. He was gone. The grief hit her like a physical blow, but adrenaline kept her upright. She looked at Kane, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. Her mind scrambled for anything, any weapon she could use. She remembered the lessons in the church basement in Philadelphia, the old missionary who had taught her about the heathens she would encounter in the West. She swallowed hard, her throat raw, and spoke the only words she knew. "Ya ati, Dadine." The words were clumsy, the accent terrible, broken by her sobbing breath. "Hello." "The people." Kane froze. The rifle lowered inch by inch. He stared at her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. He had expected screaming. He had expected to faint. He had even expected the gunshot. He had not expected his own language to fall from the lips of a terrified white woman from the East. "A white girl speaks the tongue," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The shock on his face cracked the stoic mask he wore. "Get away from us!" Lily switched back to English, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "You and your people, why did you do this?" Kane's expression hardened. The moment of curiosity vanished. He stepped forward, ignoring her flinch, and knelt beside the boy. He placed 2 fingers against the child's neck, held them there for a second, and then gently closed the boy's staring eyes. "My people did not do this," Kane said, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding together. He stood up, towering over her. "Look at the arrows in the wood. Woman, look at the fletching. Those are turkey feathers. We use hawks or eagles. Look at the man I shot. He's wearing boots under his moccasins." Lily blinked, her chest heaving. She looked at the dead rider nearby. The firelight glinted off the spur on his boot heel. A spur. Confusion warred with fear. "But they sounded like what you think we sound like." Kane cut her off. He looked toward the road. "We have no time for lessons. The others will ride to Red Mesa. They will tell the marshal that a Navajo war party slaughtered this coach. The cavalry will be here by dawn." He looked down at her. "If they find you here, alive, you are a problem. The men who did this, Rourke's men, cannot let a witness live." The name struck Lily. "Rourke. Rourke," she whispered. She scrambled for her satchel, which had been thrown clear of the wreckage. It lay open on the ground, papers spilling out like white tongues in the dust. Kane followed her gaze. He stepped closer and crouched down, picking up a large, folded sheet of parchment. It was a survey map. He recognized the lines immediately. It was the San Juan Basin, the winter grazing lands of his clan. But thick red lines had been drawn across it, dissecting the water sources, and the name Charles Rourke was stamped over the area in bold black ink. Kane felt a cold fury settle in his gut. He looked at the other papers' fake deeds, forged signatures of tribal elders who had been dead for 10 years. He looked up at Lily. The distrust in his eyes shifted to something else. Calculation. "You knew," he said. It was not a question. "You are bringing these to him." "No," Lily said, clutching the empty pistol as if it could still protect her. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing blood and ash. "I was going to stop him. I was going to make him give it back." Kane laughed, a short, bitter bark. "Stop him. With a piece of paper in this territory. Paper is only good for starting fires." He stood up, looking around the devastation. Everyone else was dead. The driver, the young mother, the boy. Only this woman remained. He had a choice to make. He could get on his horse and ride away. He could disappear into the canyons where no white soldier could find him. If he left her, the army would find her in the morning. She would tell them it was white men. Would they believe her, or would Rourke twist her words, call her hysterical, perhaps silence her in a hospital before she could speak, or worse, the riders would come back to finish the job before the army arrived. But if he took her, if a Navajo warrior was seen riding off with a white woman from a massacre site, it would not matter what the truth was. He would be branded a kidnapper, a savage who stole a bride. Every gun in the territory would be turned against him. It would bring the war he had tried so hard to avoid right to his doorstep. He looked at the map in his hand. Then he looked at Lily. She was shaking, but she had not run. She had stood over that boy and fired a gun at 7 men. She was in trouble. She was a wildfire waiting to burn everything he had left. But she held the truth in that satchel, and she was innocent. The sound of distant thunder rumbled, or perhaps it was the echo of hooves returning. Kane made his decision. He shoved the map into his belt and strode toward her. "What are you doing?" Lily scrambled back, but he was too fast. He grabbed her by the waist. She was lighter than she looked, frail beneath the heavy layers of her dress. She screamed, striking at his chest with her fists, kicking at his shins. "Let me go, you savage, let me go! Stop fighting!" Kane growled. He effortlessly lifted her off the ground. She was a whirlwind of petticoats and fury. He marched to his horse and threw her unceremoniously across the saddle. Lily gasped as the pommel dug into her stomach, before she could slide off. Kane swung up behind her. His arm clamped around her waist like an iron band, pinning her against his chest. "You are kidnapping me," she shrieked, twisting to claw at his face. Kane caught her wrist. His grip was strong, but not cruel. He pulled a rough wool blanket from his saddle roll and threw it over her head, muffling her cries and hiding her pale face from the moon. He leaned close to her ear, his voice rough with the gravity of what he was about to do. "You can hate me later, woman," he said. "Hate me all you want, but right now, if you do not ride, you die." He kicked the Mustang's flanks. The horse leaped forward, away from the road, away from the burning coach, and into the deep, unforgiving shadows of the labyrinthine canyons. Lily's world became dark beneath the wool, smelling of horse and sage and the man who had just stolen her from the ashes. She stopped screaming, the terrifying reality of his words sinking in. She was alone, in the dark, with the enemy, and God help her. He was the only thing standing between her and death. The night had dissolved into a dawn of punishing clarity. The sun did not rise gently. It breached the horizon like a spilled furnace, instantly searing the chill from the high desert air and replacing it with a dry, suffocating heat. They had been riding for hours. Lily and Hart had lost all sense of direction. The world had reduced itself to the rhythmic, jarring thud of the Mustang's hooves and the smell of the man who held her captive. Cain Yazzie rode with the ease of someone who was part of the animal, his body swaying in perfect time with the horse's gait. Lily, however, was a sack of bruised bones and terrified exhaustion. Her silk traveling dress, chosen for its elegance upon arriving in Red Mesa, was now a torture device. The corset dug into her ribs with every lurch. Her throat felt as though she had swallowed a handful of the red dust that coated everything. "Please," she croaked, her voice cracking. "Please stop. I need water." Cain did not slow the horse. He did not even look down at her. He kept his eyes on the skyline, scanning the jagged ridges of the sandstone cliffs that towered above them. "We stop when the sun is high," he said flatly. "Not before." "I cannot go on," Lily insisted, trying to twist in his grip, though his arm around her waist was like an iron bar. "My fiancé, Mr. Rourke. He will send men, he will pay you, whatever you want, he will pay you double." Cain laughed, a low rumble in his chest that she felt against her back. "Your fiancé is the one who paid for the arrows that missed your heart. Woman, do you think he sends men to save you? He sends men to finish the job." "You are lying," Lily spat, though the certainty in her voice was wavering. The memory of the attack, the boots under the moccasins. The English curse words gnawed at her. But clinging to the idea of Charles Rourke as her savior was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "He is a businessman, a gentleman. He is a snake in a suit," Cain corrected her. "And out here, the snake strikes at anything that casts a shadow." They rode in silence for another 2 hours. The terrain grew harsher. They left the scrub brush behind and entered a labyrinth of slick rock canyons, where the walls rose hundreds of feet into the air, blocking out the sky. It was a place of alien beauty, violent red and burnt orange, twisted by wind and time into shapes that looked like demons and cathedrals. Lily felt small. In Philadelphia, nature was something to be tamed, a manicured park, a flower box in a window. Here, nature was a titan that could crush her without noticing. The wind whipped sand into her eyes. The sun beat down until she felt dizzy. She was fighting a war against the elements, and she was losing. Finally, Cain steered the Mustang into a deep, narrow fissure in the rock face. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the shade. He pulled the horse to a halt and slid off, dragging Lily down with him. Her legs gave way the moment her boots touched the sand. She collapsed, her skirts billowing around her. Cain ignored her, moving to check the horse's hooves. He pulled a canteen from the saddle and tossed it to her. "Drink slowly," he ordered. "Vomit it up, and you get no more." Lily fumbled with the cap, her hands shaking. She took a sip, the water warm and tasting of tin, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever consumed. She wiped her mouth, glaring up at him. "Where are you taking me?" "Away from the lies," Cain said, loosening the saddle cinch. "And away from the army." "The army would help me," Lily cried, struggling to her feet. "They are here to protect citizens." Cain turned to her, his dark eyes hard. "The army is here to clear the land, and right now, you are inconvenient. You are a witness to a massacre that is supposed to be blamed on my people. If the Bluecoats find you, they will hand you back to Rourke, or they will silence you themselves to keep the peace treaty from holding." "You hate them," Lily accused. "That is why you say these things. You hate white men." "I hate liars," Cain said. Color does not matter. He moved past her to gather dried sagebrush for a fire, brushing her shoulder. Lily flinched. He noticed it and paused, looking at her with a strange expression, not pity, but a cold assessment. "You think I am the monster," he said softly. "Keep thinking about that. Fear keeps you alert, and out here, alert keeps you alive." Night fell like a heavy curtain. The temperature plummeted, the desert shedding its heat as quickly as it had gained it. They made camp in a shallow cave halfway up a canyon wall, hidden from the valley floor. Cain built a small fire, feeding it sparingly to keep the smoke thin. Lily sat on the opposite side of the flames, shivering violently. Her dress was ruined, torn at the hem and stained with grease and blood. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Without a word, Cain tossed a heavy buffalo hide blanket at her. It smelled of smoke and animal musk, but it was thick and warm. Lily wrapped it around herself, staring at him through the dancing flames. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and reverent. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the scar that ran from his jaw down his neck, a souvenir from a life she could not imagine. "Why?" she asked, her voice small in the vast silence of the canyon. Cain did not look up. "Why what? Why did you save me? You could have left me. You could have ridden away." Cain stopped polishing the barrel. He looked at her then, and his gaze was piercing. "I did not save you," he said, his voice devoid of sentiment. "I saved the truth. If you die there, Rourke tells the world that savages killed a bride. The army rides out. They burn the hogans. They kill the sheep. They force my people onto the dry rocks where nothing grows. Again." He reached into his belt and pulled out the folded papers, the survey maps, and the fraudulent deeds she had stolen. He waved them in the air. "And I saved these," he added. "Proof." "Those are mine," Lily said, a spark of indignation flaring in her chest. "Yours," Cain scoffed. "You are just the courier. You are the tool of greedy men. Miss Hart. Your father sends you to pay a debt. Rourke marries you to seal a theft. You are nothing more than a signature on a page to them, a piece of property to be traded for cattle and water rights." The words struck Lily harder than a physical blow. Tears pricked her eyes hot, angry tears. He was voicing the very fears she had tried to bury under layers of duty and filial piety. "I am not a tool," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I stole those papers. I was going to stop him. I was going to demand justice." "Justice." Cain let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "You think you can demand justice from men who own the judge. You are a child playing with wolves. You thought you could wave a paper and Rourke would bow down. He would have laughed in your face and locked you in a cellar until you learned to obey." He tossed the papers onto a flat rock between them. "You are not a hero, Lily Hart. You are a victim who does not know she is bleeding yet." Lily stared at him, hatred warring with shame. She wanted to scream at him, to slap that arrogant look off his face. But the terrible thing was, she knew he was right. She had been a pawn. Her father had sold her. Charles Rourke had tried to kill her. And this man, this savage, was the only one telling her the brutal, unvarnished truth. She pulled the buffalo robe tighter, turning her face away from the fire so he would not see the single tear that escaped. "I am not a victim," she said, her voice stealing. "Not anymore." Cain watched her for a long moment, the ghost of a nod barely visible. "Good, then try to sleep. We ride before dawn." The next day brought a new terror. They were descending a scree slope, the horses picking their way carefully through the loose rock. When Cain suddenly froze, he raised a hand, signaling silence. Below them, on the valley floor, a column of dust was rising. Through the haze, the distinct blue of cavalry uniforms was visible. A patrol, 10 men, riding in a double column, their sabers glinting in the sun. "Bluecoats," Cain hissed. "Scouts!" There was nowhere to hide. The slope was exposed. If they turned back, the movement would catch the soldiers' eyes. If they stayed, they would be seen. Cain turned his Mustang around. grabbed the reins of the horse. Lily was riding a mare he had cut from a wild herd years ago and pulled them alongside him. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "Do not speak. Do not cry out for help. If you do, they will shoot me, and then they will take you back to Red Mesa. Do you understand?" "But they are soldiers," Lily whispered frantically. "They will help." "Look at the lead rider," Kane commanded. "Look at the pennant on his lance." Lily squinted. The pennant was yellow and black. "That is Captain Miller's unit," Kane said grimly. "He is on Rourke's payroll. He burns winter camps for sport. If he gets you, you will never reach a courtroom." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a length of rawhide rope. "Give me your hands." "What?" "Give me your hands," Kane barked. Terrified, Lily held out her wrists. Kane bound them together, tight enough to look real, loose enough not to chafe. Then he took the end of the rope and tied it to his saddle horn. "Slump over," he ordered. "Look defeated. It looks like a prize. If they think I am a scout bringing in a prisoner, they might let us pass. If they think I am a warrior with a white woman, we are both dead." Lily felt a wave of nausea. He wanted her to play the part of the conquered woman, the very role she had been fighting against. But the look in his eyes told her this was not a game. It was survival. She slumped forward, burying her face in the horse's mane. The patrol drew closer. Kane rode down to meet them, his posture changing. He no longer looked like a proud warrior. He hunched his shoulders slightly, his face blank and stupid. "Halt!" the sergeant at the front of the column shouted. He was a thick-necked man with a sunburned face. He eyed Kane with suspicion. "Identify yourself, boy." "Scout," Kane grunted, affecting a heavy accent. "Working for Fort Wingate, taking prisoners." The sergeant looked at Lily. "A white woman. She looks like the one from the reports. The Heart Girl." "Found her wandering," Kane lied smoothly. "Crazy from the sun. Taking her to Wingate for a reward." The sergeant rode closer, his horse bumping against Lily's. He reached out and lifted her chin with the tip of his riding crop. Lily flinched, looking up at him with wide, fearful eyes. She saw no kindness in his face, only a leering curiosity. "She is a pretty thing for being dragged through the dirt," the sergeant sneered. "Maybe we should take her off your hands. Boy, save you the trip." Kane's hand drifted inches from his rifle. The air crackled with tension. "Captain Miller waits for the report," Kane said, dropping the name like a heavy stone. "He knows I come. He knows the reward is mine." The mention of the captain made the sergeant hesitate. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Fine," he grumbled. "Get her out of here. But if I find out you touched her, I will skin you myself. Go!" The sergeant waved them past. Kane kicked his horse into a trot, dragging Lily's mare behind him. Lily kept her head down, her cheeks burning with a humiliation deeper than she had ever known. She had to sit there, bound like cattle, while men discussed her as if she were a lost piece of luggage. And to survive, she had to let Kane the savage play the role of the subservient scout. It was a theater of lies, and she hated every second of it. They rode hard until the sun began to dip. Finally, reaching a hidden canyon that split the earth like a hatchet wound, tucked deep within an alcove of the cliff, protected by an overhang of rock, stood a small, dome-shaped structure made of logs and packed earth. A hogan. Smoke curled lazily from the central vent. A dog barked, a scruffy thing that ran out to greet Kane's horse with a wagging tail. A woman emerged from the doorway. She was older than Kane, with streaks of gray in her hair and a face etched with lines of laughter and hardship. She wore a traditional velveteen blouse of deep indigo and a long skirt, adorned with silver and turquoise that flashed in the twilight. This was Ada Yazzie. She looked at Kane, then at the bound white woman on the horse behind him. Her eyebrows shot up. "Well," Ada said in perfect, crisp English, "I see you have gone hunting, brother, but usually one brings back a deer, not a Philadelphia lawyer." Kane dismounted, his face weary. He walked to Lily's horse and untied the rawhide rope. "Help her down. Ada, she is about to fall." Ada moved quickly. She reached up, her hands strong and gentle, and helped Lily slide from the saddle. Lily's legs buckled, but Ada caught her, supporting her weight with surprising strength. "Easy, child," Ada soothed. "The ground is still here. It has not moved." She led Lily into the hogan. Inside, it was cool and smelled of juniper smoke and roasted corn. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. Sheepskins lined the walls. A loom stood in the corner, holding a half-finished rug of intricate geometric patterns in red, black, and gray. It was not a savage's den. It was a home. Ada sat Lily down on a pile of furs and immediately began tending to her. She brought a bowl of water and a clean cloth, wiping the grime from Lily's face. She examined the raw skin on Lily's wrists where the rope had been. "Men," Ada clicked her tongue, glancing at Kane, who was standing in the doorway. "They think rope solves everything. I have some salvation for this. It is made from pinyon pitch. It will sting, but it heals." Lily watched Ada work. The woman's touch was kind. Her eyes were warm. She hummed a soft melody as she worked, a sound that reminded Lily of her own mother, years ago. The realization hit Lily with the force of a revelation. All her life, she had been told that the Indians were godless, bloodthirsty animals. She had expected skulls on poles and wild screaming. Instead, she found a woman who scolded her brother and worried about rope burns. "You speak English," Lily whispered. "I went to boarding school," Ada said, her voice tightening slightly. "They taught me to speak like a lady and scrub floors like a servant. But I kept the language. It is useful for trading, and for scolding stubborn brothers." Kane stepped into the light of the fire pit. "She is dangerous, Ada. She knows too much. The army is looking for her." "She is a guest," Ada retorted. "And she is hurt." "She is a match," Kane argued, pointing at Lily. "And we are dry grass. If Rourke finds her here, he burns us out. We should leave her at the mission in Santa Fe, and let Rourke kill her on the road." Ada shook her head. She looked at Lily, then at the satchel Kane had brought in. "I looked at her papers while you watered the horses. Kane, she has the surveys. She has the proof we have been looking for, the proof that the treaty was violated." "White man's paper," Kane dismissed. "White man's law," Ada corrected. "We cannot fight them with arrows anymore. Kane, you know this. We need words. We need someone who knows their game." She gestured to Lily. "She knows the game." Kane looked at Lily. The hostility was still there, but it was warring with pragmatism. "She is weak," Kane grumbled. "She will break." "I did not break when the coach crashed," Lily spoke up, her voice stronger now. She looked from Ada to Kane. "And I did not break when you tied me up. I want my family's honor back, and I want Rourke to pay." Ada smiled, patting Lily's hand. "See, she has fire. You just have to blow in the coals a little." Later that night, the hogan was quiet. Ada had gone to sleep on the far side of the fire. Lily lay on her sheepskin bed, but she could not sleep. She watched Kane. He was sitting by the entrance, keeping watch, his back resting against the log frame. He had taken off his shirt to tend to a bruise on his shoulder. In the flickering orange light, she saw the map of his life written on his skin. There was a jagged scar on his ribs, a bullet wound. There were thin, white lines on his back, whip marks, and on his arm. A tattoo in blue ink, faded with time. He was not a caricature from a dime novel. He was a man made of flesh and blood and history. He spoke to his horse with a tenderness he never showed her. He respected his sister. He had saved her life, not for a reward, but for a principle. A strange feeling unfurled in Lily's chest, a tightening that was part fear, part awe, and part something else entirely, something heat-heavy and dangerous. She watched the way the firelight played over the muscles of his arm as he sharpened his knife. She watched the intense focus in his dark eyes. For the first time, she did not see a captor. She saw a warrior. And God help her. She wanted to know what it felt like to be looked at by those eyes, not with suspicion, but with the same intensity he gave to the land he was willing to die for. Kane looked up suddenly, sensing her gaze. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, feigning sleep. her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But in the darkness of the hogan, the air between them had shifted. The line of hatred had blurred, replaced by a tension that was far more volatile. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It brought exposure. For 3 days, they moved through the labyrinth of the canyonlands. The landscape was a broken jaw of red rock and scrub brush, unforgiving to anyone who did not know its language. Cain Yazzie became a teacher, though he had little patience for the task. "Heels down," he barked, riding alongside her. "Do not sit on the horse like a sack of flour. Move with him. If you fight the rhythm, you will be bleeding before noon." Lillian Hart gritted her teeth and adjusted her posture. Her thighs burned, and her hands were blistered from the reins. But she did not complain. The terror of the stagecoach attack had calcified into a cold, hard determination. She watched Cain constantly. She watched how he scanned the horizon, never letting his gaze rest in one place for more than a second. She watched how he tracked water by the flight of mourning doves. At a dry wash, Cain stopped and dismounted. He pointed to the ground. "Look," he commanded. Lily slid down, her legs trembling with fatigue. She stared at the sand. It looked like sand. "I see nothing," she admitted. "That is because you look with city eyes." Cain knelt, tracing a faint indentation with his finger. "Here, a horseshoe print, deep at the toe, light at the heel. The horse was moving fast, carrying a heavy man. And here," he pointed to a scuff mark nearby. "A boot heel, but look at the pattern. It is a crosshatch. Army issue." He looked up at her. "Riders passed here 2 hours ago. They are quartering the ground, searching in a grid. They are not tracking us yet, but they are close." Later, in the shade of a twisted juniper tree, Lily opened the satchel again. She spread the documents on a flat rock. Cain stood over her, casting a long shadow. "I told you," Lily said, her finger tracing the bold black lines of the fraudulent survey. "I knew it was illegal, but I did not know it was war." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. "I stole these to save my family from debt. Cain, I thought I could trade them. I thought if I threatened Rourke with exposure, he would cancel the debt and let me go." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I was going to blackmail a murderer. I was a fool." Cain looked at the papers, then at her. He saw the shame in her expression, but he also saw the anger. "You were not a fool," Cain said quietly. "You were a daughter trying to survive. Just as I was a son trying to survive the long walk. We do what we must when the wolves are at the door." It was the first time he had offered her an absolution. Lily felt a knot in her chest loosen. "They betrayed you too," Cain added, his voice hardening. "Rourke did not just want the land. He wanted you dead so he could inherit the claim without the burden of a wife. We are both inconveniences to him." "Lily, and he intends to erase us." Before Lily could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, distant, but unmistakable. A moment later, a rider appeared on the ridge above them. It was not a soldier, nor a hired gun. It was a young Navajo boy on a spotted pony, signaling frantically. Cain mounted his Mustang in one fluid motion and rode to meet him. They spoke rapidly in their native tongue, gestures sharp and urgent. When Cain returned to Lily, his face was a mask of stone. "What is it?" Lily asked, fear spiking in her blood. "The news has reached Red Mesa," Cain said, swinging his rifle into a more accessible position. "The story is out. They are saying a Navajo war party massacred the stagecoach. They say Cain Yazzie, kidnapped the white bride to sell her into slavery or worse." "That is a lie," Lily cried. "It is a lie that sells newspapers and justifies hanging," Cain retorted. "Marshal Boone has put $1,000 on my head, dead or alive, and $500 for your safe return." "$500," Lily whispered. "Alive, you are a victim," Cain said grimly. "Dead, you are a tragedy. Rourke wins either way, but he prefers you dead, so you cannot speak. We have to move, now." They rode hard, abandoning the valley floor for the treacherous, narrow trails that clung to the canyon walls. The wind picked up, howling through the crevices. carrying the scent of rain and ozone. They were traversing a narrow ledge known as the Spider's Thread when the crack of a rifle shattered the afternoon. A bullet struck the rock face inches from Lily's head, spraying stone shards into her cheek. She screamed, her mare rearing dangerously close to the precipice. "Ride!" Kane roared. "Do not stop!" Below them, on the opposite ridge, 3 men were dismounting, leveling their rifles. They were scouts trackers hired by Boone. Lily kicked her mare, terror giving her strength. They scrambled up the trail, hooves clattering on slick sandstone. Bullets whined past them like angry hornets. "Up there!" Kane pointed to a fissure in the rock wall, a steep scramble that led to a higher plateau. "Go!" Lily forced her horse up the incline. The animal scrambled, its hooves sparking, muscles straining. Kane was right behind her, firing back over his shoulder to keep the pursuers' heads down. They crested the ridge, but the trail vanished. Ahead lay a gap, a fissure in the earth 5 feet wide, dropping away into darkness. "Jump it!" Kane shouted. Lily's mare balked. "Jump!" Kane slapped the mare's rump. The horse leaped. Lily flew through the air, clutching the mane, and landed hard on the far side, but the landing was slick with the loose shale. The mare stumbled, going to its knees. Lily was thrown. She slid across the rock, toward the edge of the cliff. "Kane!" She scrambled for purchase, her fingers tearing at the stone, but she was sliding backward. Her boots kicked empty air. A hand clamped around her wrist. Kane had leapt his Mustang, dismounted in midair it seemed, and thrown himself flat on the rock. He held her, his grip bruising, his face contorted with effort. "I have you," he grunted through clenched teeth. "I have you." He hauled her up. Lily scrambled over the lip of the cliff and collapsed on top of him. For a moment, they lay there, chests heaving, tangled together in the dirt. The gunfire from below had stopped. The gap was too wide for the scouts to follow without a bridge. Lily looked up. Kane's face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the sweat and the gunpowder. His eyes were wide, dark, and dilated with adrenaline. His hand was still gripping her arm. His other hand pressed flat against the small of her back, pressing her to him. The danger had stripped away the social veneer. There was no white woman and Indian scout. There were just 2 hearts beating violently against each other. Kane pulled away first. Standing up abruptly, he offered her a hand, but he did not look at her. "The storm is coming," he said, his voice rough. "There is a trapper's cabin 3 miles north. We will shelter there." The cabin was a ruin of gray wood, clinging to the side of the mountain like a barnacle. The roof leaked, and the wind whistled through gaps in the logs, but it was dry enough. Outside, the heavens opened. Rain hammered the earth with the violence of a biblical flood. Thunder shook the floorboards. Inside, Kane managed to coax a small fire from dry wood found in the corner. The light was dim, casting long, dancing shadows. Lily sat by the fire, wringing out the hem of her dress. She was soaked to the bone, shivering. Her hair hung in wet tendrils around her face. She looked at Kane. He stood by the window, staring out into the storm, his back to her. He was tense, a coiled spring. The near death on the cliff hung between them. Lily could still feel the phantom pressure of his hand on her back, the raw power of his body pulling her from the void. She realized, with a sudden, piercing clarity, that she did not want to go back to being the Lillian Hart of Philadelphia. That woman was afraid. That woman was polite. That woman was dead. She stood up. Her legs were steady now. "Kane," he turned. His eyes were guarded, wary. "You should sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." "I cannot sleep," Lily said. She took a step toward him. "I close my eyes and I see the cliff. I see the bullet hitting the rock. Fear is natural," Kane said dismissively. "It keeps the blood moving." "It is not just fear," Lily said. She took another step. She was close enough to touch him now. She saw the pulse beating in his throat. Kane stepped back, his back hitting the rough logs of the cabin wall. "Lily, Do not what? She challenged softly. Do you feel, do not acknowledge that you saved me, that you held me? I am a scout, Kane said, his voice dropping to a warning growl. I did my job. Do not mistake adrenaline for affection. Woman, you are white. I am Dine. Out there. That means war. In here. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. In here. There is no war, Lily whispered. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest. His heart was hammering against her palm, betraying his stoic face. He was not indifferent. He was terrified, not of the soldiers, but of this, of her. Kane caught her wrist. His grip was strong, intended to push her away. I am not a gentleman. Lily, I have killed men. I have lived in the dirt. I have forgotten how to be soft. He leaned down, his face close to hers, trying to scare her with the truth of his brutality. I am not gentle. I have lived in war too long. I do not believe I can be gentle with anything anymore. Lily did not pull away. She looked up into his dark, tormented eyes. She saw the pain there, the years of loss, but she also saw a fierce, burning life that she craved more than her next breath. She did not want a gentleman. She wanted the man who had ridden down a cliff into hell to find her. Don't be gentle, she gasped, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes burning into his. Kane froze. The invitation hung in the air, raw and reckless. He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes. Searching for hesitation, he found none. He let out a low groan, a sound of surrender. Sweetheart, he murmured, his voice rasping like sand over stone. The West don't do gentle. He released her wrist and tangled his hands in her wet hair, pulling her to him. The kiss was not tentative. It was a collision. It tasted of rain and desperation. Kane kissed her as if he were trying to breathe for the first time in years, devouring her sigh. Lily met him with equal force, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer, needing the solid reality of him to anchor her to the earth. He walked her backward until her back pressed against the rough wooden wall. The fire crackled, flaring up as a draft caught the embers. Outside, the thunder rolled, but it was distant compared to the storm inside the cabin. Kane's hands moved over her, rough and urgent, memorizing the shape of her through the damp silk of her dress. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of rain and smoke and man. There were no more words, only the sound of their breathing and the drumming of the rain in the heart of the wilderness. With death waiting on the trail behind them, they chose life. They chose each other. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the roof, casting beams of dusty light onto the floor. The storm had passed. The air was crisp and cold. Lily woke first. She lay still for a moment, the memory of the night rushing back with a flash of heat. She looked at Kane. He was already awake, sitting by the dead fire, cleaning his rifle. He was fully dressed. The silence was heavy. The awkwardness of the morning after was a universal language. Lily sat up, pulling the buffalo robe around her shoulders. Kane. He did not look at her immediately. When he did, his expression was unreadable. The rain washed out the tracks. We have a few hours ahead. He stood up, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. I should not have touched you. It complicates things. If they catch us now, they will not just hang me. They will say I defiled you. Lily stood up, letting the robe fall. She smoothed her ruined dress, her chin lifting with a new dignity. You did not defile me, she said clearly. And you did not force me. I chose this, just as I am choosing what we do next. Kane paused. And what do we do next? Run to Mexico? No, Lily said. She walked over to the satchel and picked up the documents. We are done running. If we run, we are guilty. If we hide, Rourke wins. She turned to him, her eyes fierce. I do not want to go back to being a victim. Kane, I want to be the woman who brings him down. I will testify. I will walk into that courtroom in Red Mesa, and I will tell them everything. I will tell them about the false deed. I will tell them about the attack and I will tell them that you are the only honorable man in this entire territory." Kane shook his head. "A white court will not listen to you if you stand beside an Indian." "Then make them listen." Lily stepped closer to him. "But I cannot do it alone. I need you, not just as a guide. I need you by my side." Kane looked at her. He saw the change. The frightened girl from Philadelphia was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by the desert, a woman who had looked at his scars and not turned away. He battled with his instincts. Every survival sense he had screamed at him to put her on a horse, send her to the nearest fort, and disappear. Loving her was dangerous. Trusting the law was suicide. But then he remembered the way she had held him in the dark. "We're going to Red Mesa," Kane said finally. His voice was steady. "The decision made. We do not go to ask for permission. We go to take back what is ours." He opened the door of the cabin. The valley below was washed clean, the red rocks shining in the sun. "Get your boots, Lily," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It is a long ride to justice." Red Mesa was not asleep. It was a restless animal, breathing in the dust of the day and exhaling the smoke of coal fires and cheap tobacco. Kane, Yazzie, and Lillian Hart rode into town under the cover of a moonless night. They had left the horses a mile back, tethered in a dry wash, and walked the rest of the way. Kane wore a battered slouch hat pulled low over his eyes and a heavy canvas duster that concealed his weapons and the telltale breadth of his shoulders. Lily wore a simple woolen poncho they had scavenged from the trapper's cabin, pulling the hood up to hide her face. They moved through the back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfare where the gas lamps cast long, exposing pools of light. The smell of the town was distinctive manure, sawdust, and the metallic tang of money changing hands. "The livery stable," Kane whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant piano music drifting from the saloon. "Old Ben Crowley sleeps in the loft. He owes me a life." They slipped into the dark cavern of the stable. The air here was warm and smelled of sweet hay. A lantern flickered low on a hook, illuminating a gray-haired man slumped on a bale of straw, a half-empty bottle of rye cradled in his lap. Kane stepped forward and kicked the boot of the sleeping man. "Wake up, Ben!" Old Ben Crowley snorted, choked, and scrambled upright, his hand fumbling for a pistol that was not there. He squinted, his eyes bleary with drink. When he focused on the tall figure towering over him, his jaw dropped. "Kane," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "Ghost. They said you were dead. They said the army chased you into the canyon." "Not dead yet," Kane said grimly. He stepped aside. "And I am not alone." Lily lowered her hood. Ben's eyes went wide, white saucers in the gloom. He made the sign of the cross. "Miss Hart, but the marshal said. He said the savages cut your throat." "The marshal lied, Ben," Lily said, her voice steady and cold. "And Charles Rourke paid him to say it." Ben looked from Lily to Kane, the white woman and the Navajo warrior standing side by side. The impossible sight seemed to sober him instantly. He rubbed a shaking hand over his face. "You should not be here," Ben hissed. "The town is a powder keg. Rourke has the miners and the cattlemen whipped into a frenzy. They are talking about riding out at dawn to burn the settlement at Spider Rock. If they find an Injun here tonight, they will hang him without a trial." "That is why we need you," Kane said. "Get her to the hotel. Through the back way. She needs to get into Rourke's office." "And you?" Ben asked. "I am going to draw their fire," Kane said. Lily stood before the heavy oak door of the Red Mesa Hotel's finest suite. She took a deep breath, smoothing her dirty hair and pinching her cheeks to bring blood to the surface. She did not need to act much. The exhaustion and terror of the last few days were etched into her bones. She knocked. The door opened. Charles Rourke stood there, a glass of brandy in his hand. He was immaculate in a velvet smoking jacket. When he saw her, the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "Lily! Charles!" she choked out, stumbling forward. "Oh, God! Charles!" She collapsed into his arms. It took every ounce of her will not to recoil as he held her. He smelled of lavender water and expensive soap, the scent of a predator who washed the blood off his hands before dinner. "I thought I had lost you," Rourke said, pulling her into the room and kicking the door shut. His voice was thick with emotion, but when he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were scanning her face, searching. "My poor dear, the savages. Did they hurt you?" "It was horrible," Lily sobbed, burying her face in his chest to hide her dry eyes. "The noise, the fire. I ran into the desert. I have been walking for days." Rourke led her to the velvet settee and poured her a drink with shaking hands. "You are safe now. You are safe with me. We will get the doctor. We will fix this." He sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee. "But tell me, Lily, the satchel, your father's papers, did you save them?" The question came too fast, too eager. "I lost everything," Lily lied, watching him closely. "The coach burned. Charles, everything is ash." A flash of pure, unadulterated rage crossed Rourke's face. Gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of sympathy. "A pity, but papers can be replaced. You are what matters." He stood up and walked to his desk. "I must send a telegram to your father. He will be relieved." Lily's gaze drifted to the desk. There, sitting on top of a stack of ledgers, was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her father's script. While Rourke's back was turned, pouring more water into a basin, Lily stood up and moved silently to the desk. She glanced at the open letter. "Unfortunate regarding the debt, Charles. But if the girl proves difficult, or if the marriage cannot be consummated due to her stubbornness, do what you must. Ensure silence, even if it must be purchased with blood. The family name cannot withstand a scandal. Better a dead martyr than a live whistleblower." The world tilted on its axis. It was not just Rourke. It was her father. He had not just sold her. He had signed her death warrant. He knew Rourke was dangerous, and he had sent her anyway, giving Rourke permission to dispose of her if she became a liability. The grief she expected did not come. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over her. The last tether that bound her to the laws of polite society, to the duty of a daughter, snapped. She was no longer Lillian Hart of Philadelphia. She was a survivor of the canyon. "Lily!" Rourke turned around. She snatched her hand back, but it was too late. He saw where she was looking. He saw the realization in her eyes. The mask dropped completely. Rourke smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. "He is a pragmatic man. Your father," Rourke said softly. "Business is business, my dear." Before Lily could run, the door burst open. Marshal Boone strode in, his face flushed with triumph. "We got him! Charles," Boone shouted. "We caught the rat trying to sabotage the train depot. He is in irons." Rourke looked at Lily, his smile widening. "Perfect timing. It seems we have our villain, and now we have our witness." The next morning, the sun rose over a town thirsty for blood. A scaffold had been hastily erected in the town square. A crowd of 300 people, miners, ranchers, women in bonnets gathered, buzzing with the morbid excitement of a carnival. Kane stood on the platform. His hands were bound behind his back with thick hemp rope. They had beaten him. His left eye was swollen shut, and blood trickled from a cut on his lip, staining his shirt. But he stood straight, his head high, looking out over the sea of angry white faces with a disdain that only fueled their rage. Marshal Boone stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. "Citizens of Red Mesa," Boone bellowed. "Justice is swift in this territory. We have caught the savage responsible for the massacre of the stagecoach number 4, the man who murdered women and children and kidnapped our own Miss Hart." A roar of anger went up from the crowd. "Hang him! String him up! But first," Boone shouted, pointing a finger at the hotel balcony where Rourke stood, "we must hear from the victim herself, Miss Lillian Hart, who miraculously escaped this beast's clutches." Lily was shoved out onto the wooden platform of the square, not the balcony. Rourke wanted her close, and wanted the crowd to see her tears. 2 deputies stood behind her, their hands hovering near their guns. She looked at Kane. He met her gaze. In his one good eye, she saw no fear. He did not plead. He did not ask her to save him. He looked at her with a calm acceptance. He was ready to die to keep her safe. If she lied, if she played the victim, she would live. She would go back to the east, or marry Rourke, and Kane would take the blame to the grave. The crowd went silent, waiting for the weeping woman to condemn the monster. "Tell them, Lily." Rourke's voice drifted down from the balcony, smooth and commanding. "Tell them what he did to you." Lily looked at the crowd. She saw the hate in their eyes. She saw the lies that built this town. She looked at Rourke, preening like a peacock, and then she looked at her father's letter in her mind's eye, in sure silence. "No," she whispered. She took a step forward. Her voice was not the tremulous whisper of a victim. It was the ringing tone of a lawyer's daughter who had found her own law. "He did nothing to me," Lily screamed, her voice cutting through the silence. "He saved me." The crowd murmured, confused. Rourke's smile faltered. "She is delirious," Boone shouted, stepping toward her. "The trauma." Lily moved faster than anyone expected. She spun toward the young deputy on her left, the one looking at her with wide, sympathetic eyes. In one fluid motion, she snatched the Colt revolver from his holster. Before the deputy could react, she raised the heavy gun and fired a single shot into the air. Crack! The sound stunned the square into absolute stillness. "Listen to me," Lily roared, holding the gun with both hands, shaking but aiming it at the sky. The attack on the stagecoach was not Navajo. It was the Red Mesa riders. I saw them. I saw the boots under their moccasins. I saw the English words on their lips. She swung the gun around, pointing it directly at the balcony where Charles Rourke stood. "And he paid them," she screamed. "Charles Rourke paid them to kill me and steal the land. I have the surveys. I have the proof. This man is not a savage. The savage is standing on that balcony in a velvet coat." "Kill her!" Rourke shrieked, his face twisting into a rictus of panic. "She is mad! Shoot her!" Marshal Boone drew his gun, aiming at Lily. "Get down!" Kane roared. Chaos erupted. A shot rang out not from Boone, but from the crowd. A bullet struck Boone's shoulder, spinning him around. Old Ben Crowley stood by the water trough, a smoking Winchester in his hands. "I have seen enough lies for one lifetime," Ben shouted. Then the shadows came alive. From the alleyways and the rooftops, figures emerged, Ada Yazzie and a dozen Navajo warriors, who had slipped into town under the guise of traders or laborers, raised their weapons. They did not fire into the crowd. They fired at the deputies, at the riders, creating a wall of lead to protect the platform. Kane did not wait. He twisted his body, snapping the wrist restraints with a force born of desperate fury and the fact that Ben had loosened the knot the night before in the stable. He lunged at the nearest deputy, using his shoulder as a battering ram, knocking the man off the platform. He grabbed a knife from the deputy's belt, slashed his leg ropes, and vaulted toward Lily. "Give me the gun!" Kane shouted over the roar of the crowd. Lily shoved the Colt into his hand. Kane spun, firing 2 shots that took out a rider on the hotel roof who was drawing a bead on them. "To the hotel," Kane commanded. "We end this." The square was a bedlam of screaming civilians and gunfire. The townspeople, confused and terrified, scrambled for cover. The battle was now between Rourke's hired guns and the small band of Navajo and their unlikely allies. Kane grabbed Lily's hand and they ran. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet. They burst through the doors of the hotel, overturning tables in the lobby for cover. "Stay here," Kane ordered, pushing Lily behind the heavy oak reception desk. "No," Lily said, grabbing a shotgun from behind the clerk's counter. She pumped the action, her face smeared with dust and determination. "We started this together. We will finish it together." Kane looked at her, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. "Then do not miss." They fought their way up the grand staircase. Rourke was retreating, realizing his control was shattering with every second. He fled toward the upper balcony. Trying to reach the escape ladder to the alley, they cornered him in the hallway. Rourke turned, a small, silver-plated pistol in his hand. He looked like a cornered rat, his elegance stripped away, leaving only the cowardice beneath. "You cannot kill me," Rourke spat, backing away toward the open balcony doors. "I own this town. I own the judge. I own the governor." You own nothing," Kane said, walking steadily toward him, his gun lowered but ready. "You bought ghosts, Rourke, and now they are here to collect." Rourke raised his pistol, aiming at Kane's chest. "Kane!" Lily screamed. But before Rourke could pull the trigger, a shot boomed from the street below. It was Ada, from the street. She had seen the silhouette on the balcony. Her aim was true. The bullet struck the railing next to Rourke, sending a shower of wood splinters into his face. Rourke flinched violently. Stepping back, his heel caught on the edge of the rug. He stumbled, his arms flailed. Grasping at the air, he fell backward, through the open French doors, over the low railing of the balcony. There was a short, terrified scream, followed by a sickening thud on the dusty street below. Silence rippled outward from the hotel, spreading across the square. The gunfire sputtered and died. The riders, seeing their paymaster dead in the dirt, threw down their guns or fled into the alleys. Kane walked to the balcony and looked down. Charles Rourke lay twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring up at the sky he had tried to steal. Seeing nothing, Kane felt a hand on his arm. Lily stood beside him, the shotgun lowered. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the stark reality of what they had done. "It is over," she whispered. Kane looked at the crowd below. They were creeping out of their hiding places, gathering in a circle around the body. They looked up at the balcony, at the Navajo warrior and the white woman standing together. The hate was gone, replaced by a stunned awe. "No," Kane said, his hand covering hers. "The shooting is over. The fight for the truth has just begun." He looked at her, and for the first time in days, the tension in his face broke. He did not smile, but his eyes were soft. "You were brave, Lillian Hart," he said quietly. "You were a storm." "I had a good teacher," Lily replied, leaning her head against his shoulder, too tired to care about the eyes of the town. Below them, Marshal Boone was being dragged away by two citizens. Old Ben was shaking hands with Ada. The world had changed. It was not perfect, it was not fixed, but the lie was dead. And in the silence of the aftermath, something new began to grow in the dust of Red Mesa. The dust in Red Mesa tasted different when it was not mixed with fear. It tasted of iron and settled earth. The silence that followed the death of Charles Rourke was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the collective exhalation of a town that had been holding its breath for years. The body of the cattle baron had been removed from the street, carried away by the undertaker's assistants with a hurried, quiet efficiency. There was no mourning procession. In the west, a dead tyrant was just a carcass that attracted flies. Red Mesa was already looking toward the next sunrise. Dr. Evans, a man whose hands shook from whiskey but remained steady when holding a scalpel, had turned the saloon tables into a triage center. It was a strange tableau, one that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. A Navajo warrior with a bullet graze on his arm sat on a stool next to a grocer who had twisted his ankle fleeing the square. Ada Yazzie moved between them, her dark skirt swishing over the sawdust floor, applying a poultice of sage and chewed roots to the warrior's wound while Dr. Evans stitched the arm of a miner. They worked in tandem, not speaking, but acknowledging the necessity of the moment. Kane Yazzie stood by the swinging doors of the saloon, watching the street. He had wiped the war paint from his face, but the hardness in his eyes remained. He was waiting. The violence was over, but the bureaucracy was about to begin. And Kane knew that a pen could be deadlier than a Winchester rifle. A cloud of dust on the horizon heralded the arrival of the authority. It was not the corrupt Marshal Boone's men this time. Boone was currently sitting in his own jail cell, weeping and bargaining with God and anyone else who would listen. This was the United States Cavalry, led by Colonel Blackwood from Fort Wingate. They rode in 2 by 2, the yellow stripes on their trousers bright against the drab horses. Colonel Blackwood was a man carved from granite, with a mustache that hid his mouth and eyes that had seen too many skirmishes to be impressed by local drama. He dismounted in front of the hotel, slapping the dust from his gloves. Lily Hart stepped out to meet him. She had washed her face and pinned up her hair, wearing a borrowed dress from the hotel owner's wife. It was plain calico, far removed from the Philadelphia silk she had arrived in, but she wore it like armor. "Colonel," Lily said, her voice steady. "I am Lillian Hart." Blackwood looked her over, noting the bruises on her wrist and the steel in her spine. "Miss Hart, we received a frantic telegraph from the depot master about an uprising. I expected to find the town burning. Instead, I find a dead cattleman in a town that looks like it is sleeping off a hangover." "There was no uprising, Colonel," Lily said, holding out the leather satchel, the same battered bag that had survived the canyon, the fire, and the flood. There was a correction. She led him into the hotel lobby, which had been cleared of debris. Kane followed, silent as a shadow. When the colonel saw him, his hand drifted instinctively to his saber. "Is that the scout?" Blackwood asked, his voice cooling. "The one accused of the kidnapping." "That is the man who saved my life," Lily interjected, placing herself physically between the colonel and Kane. "And he is the only reason you are not collecting my body from a ditch right now." They sat at a round table. Lily laid out the documents. She walked the colonel through them with the precision of the lawyer she had been trained to be. She showed him the original survey maps of the San Juan Basin. She showed him the forged deeds with the signatures of dead elders. She showed him the correspondence between Rourke and the railway surveyors, plotting to divert water rights to starve the Navajo out of the valley. Rourke was not just stealing land. "Colonel," Lily said, tapping a finger on a ledger, "he was manufacturing a war. He hired the Red Mesa riders to attack my stagecoach. He ordered them to dress as Navajo to provoke your regiment into a massacre. He wanted the army to do his dirty work." Blackwood read the papers in silence. He was a hard man, but he was a soldier, not a butcher. He despised disorder, and Charles Rourke had created chaos for profit. "This is substantial," Blackwood admitted, rubbing his jaw. "The forgery is clumsy, but the intent is clear. Rourke was playing a dangerous game." He looked up at Kane. "However, Miss Hart, the law is the law. This man," he gestured to Kane, "killed 3 men in the square yesterday, and witnesses say he shot a man on the roof. Self-defense." A voice rasped from the doorway. Old Ben Crowley hobbled in, leaning on a cane. He looked cleaner than he had in 10 years. "I saw the whole thing. Colonel, those riders opened fire on an unarmed woman. Kane here returned fire to protect her, and I fired a few shots myself. Are you going to arrest me, too?" Ada Yazzie stepped forward from the shadows. "And I," she said softly, "and my brother's son, we defended the innocent." The colonel looked around the room. He saw the faces of the townspeople peering through the windows. He saw the exhausted resolve in Lily's eyes. He knew that arresting Kane Yazzie would turn this fragile peace into a riot. "The territory of Arizona thanks you for your assistance in quelling a bandit insurrection," Blackwood said carefully, choosing his words with political precision. "It appears Mr. Yazzie acted as an irregular auxiliary to the law." He closed the file. "I will take these documents to the governor in Santa Fe. The land transfer to Rourke Enterprises is suspended immediately pending an investigation." It was not a complete victory. It was a pause. But in the relentless machinery of the West, a pause was a miracle. The days that followed were a study in uncomfortable adjustments. The truth about Rourke's fraud spread through the territory like wildfire, with the hero revealed as a villain. The social structure of Red Mesa began to fracture and reform. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, who had once refused to sell flour to Ada, now tipped his hat when she walked past. It was not because he had suddenly learned to love her people. It was because he knew the Rourke money was gone, and the Navajo wool trade was suddenly the most stable economy in the region. Pragmatism, as Kane had predicted, was the only religion that truly converted people. Negotiations for the land began in the back room of the telegraph office. It was not a perfect restoration. The railroad was too powerful a beast to be stopped entirely. They will not move the track 5 miles north, Colonel Blackwood explained to Kane and a gathered group of Navajo elders. The grade is too steep, but they are willing to pay reparations for the right-of-way, and they will agree to fencing that protects the sheep grazing lands to the south. Reparations. Kane spat the word. Money does not bring back the quiet. Take the money, Kane, Lily advised gently, touching his arm. Take the money and buy the water rights to the lower creek before someone else does. Secure the future. You cannot fight the iron horse, but you can build a fence it cannot cross. Kane looked at her. He hated that she was right. He hated the compromise. But he looked at the young boys of his clan, waiting outside on their ponies, and he nodded. He signed the paper, not with an X, but with his name, written in the block letters Lily had taught him to refine during the long nights in the canyon. Then came the letter. It arrived 3 days later, carried by a courier from the railhead. It was addressed to Miss Lillian Hart. Lily sat on the porch of the hotel to read it. Kane stood nearby, leaning against a pillar, whittling a piece of cedar. He watched her face as she scanned the lines. Her expression did not crumble. It hardened into something resembling marble. Your father, Kane asked. His lawyer, Lily corrected, folding the paper with sharp, precise creases. My father is indisposed. He has suffered a nervous collapse upon hearing of the tragedy. She let out a short, dry laugh. He wants me to come home. He says that if I return immediately and keep quiet about the misunderstandings regarding the documents, he can arrange a marriage with a banker in Boston. He says my reputation can be salvaged. He says he forgives me for my hysteria. He forgives you. Kane stopped whittling, the knife stilled in his hand. He offers me a ticket and an allowance. Lily continued, staring out at the red dust of the street. $3,000 a year, the price of silence. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and bruised orange. What will you do? Kane asked. His voice was neutral, carefully devoid of emotion. $3,000 is a lot of money. You could have silk dresses again. You could have ice in your water. Lily turned to him. Do you think I want that after everything? I think you are a woman of the city, Kane said. This dirt, it gets under your skin. It ruins your hands. It ages you. You survived the adventure. Lily. But survival is not living. Go back to your soft bed. My soft bed was a prison, Lily snapped. She ripped the letter in half, then in half again. She tossed the pieces into the wind, watching them scatter like white moths. I am not going back, she said. I sent a reply with the courier. I told him that Lillian Hart of Philadelphia died in the canyon. I told him that if he ever contacts me again, I will send copies of the land surveys to the New York Times. She looked at Kane, her chin lifted in challenge. I am staying. That evening, Kane found her at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to the open sagebrush. She was watching the stars emerge, one by one. He stopped a few feet away. The distance between them felt vast, filled with things unsaid. You are making a mistake, Kane said. Lily turned. Am I? Look at them. Kane gestured back toward the town. They smile at you now because you are the woman who brought down Rourke. You are a novelty, a hero. But tomorrow next month you will be the white woman who lives near the reservation. You will be the traitor to your race. They will whisper. Then they will shout. Then they will throw stones. He stepped closer, his face tight with the pain of his own experience. And me, I am curious about them. A good Indian for now. But if I walk down the street holding your hand, the mood changes. I do not want you to live in that shadow. Lily, it is cold in that shadow. I am not afraid of the cold, Lily said. I spent 3 nights in a freezing canyon with you. I found it quite warm. Do not joke, Kane growled, though his eyes betrayed him. I am trying to save you. I do not need saving. Cain. Lily stepped into his space, forcing him to look down at her. I saved myself. I shot a gun. I stood up to a colonel. I walked away from my father's money. I am not the porcelain doll you think I am. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, calloused from rains and rifles. Her hand was smaller, paler, but her grip was strong. You said the West does not do gentle things, Lily whispered. You were right. It is hard. It is brutal. But it is real. In Philadelphia, everyone smiles and lies. Here, people scowl and tell the truth. I prefer the scowl. It will be a hard life, Cain warned, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I have nothing to offer you but a horse and a share of a canyon that the government might try to steal again in 10 years. Then we will fight them again in 10 years, Lily said. But we will do it from our own front porch. She looked up at him, her eyes searching for him. The question is not whether I can handle life. Cain, the question is, do you want me in it, or are you too afraid to let someone in? The question hung in the air. Cain looked at her, this infuriating, stubborn, beautiful woman who had fallen from the sky and wrecked his solitude. He thought about the empty hogan. He thought about the silence of the nights before she arrived. He realized with a jolt of terror that the silence now frightened him more than the noise of the town. I am afraid, Cain admitted, his voice low. I am afraid that one day you will look at me and see a savage, or that you will look at the mirror and see a wasted life. Let me worry about the mirror, Lily said. You just worry about the man standing in front of me. Cain exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture of reverence that was far more intimate than the passionate embrace in the cabin. You are stubborn, he murmured against her skin. I am, Lily agreed. It is my best quality. The weeks turned into months. The sensation of Red Mesa faded, replaced by the mundane rhythm of life. Marshal Boone was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The Red Mesa riders scattered to the wind, some dead, some fleeing to Mexico. Lily did not move into the hotel. She used the last of her jewelry, a pearl necklace her mother had left her, to buy a small plot of land on the edge of the valley, a buffer zone between the town and the reservation. She did not become a rancher's wife. She became a bridge. She set up a small table in the front room of her newly built cabin. She put up a sign, L. Hart, legal consultation, literacy. It started slowly, a miner with a claim dispute. A widow was cheated by a merchant. Then, hesitantly, a Navajo sheep herder with a grazing permit he could not read. Lily helped them all. She charged the white men $2 and the Navajo a basket of corn or a woven blanket. Cain was not always there. He still vanished for days at a time, riding the high ridges, scouting for the army, or guiding geological surveyors who were mapping the water tables. He was a man who needed the horizon, but he always came back. One afternoon, 6 months after the shooting, Cain rode up to the cabin. He tied his Mustang to the rail and walked up the steps. The sound of his boots on the wood was heavy and familiar. Lily was teaching a young Navajo girl and the baker's son how to write their names on a slate. She looked up as Cain entered. The sun was behind him, framing him in gold. He looked tired, dusty, and smelling of sage. Class is dismissed, Lily said, clapping her hands. The children scrambled out, giggling. Cain watched them go. He took off his hat and slapped it against his leg. The surveyor says there is good water in the North Canyon, Cain said. He says the peach trees could grow there again. That is good news, Lily said, wiping the chalk from her hands. I told him it does not matter what he says. Cain continued. I told him that land belongs to the family of the woman who reads the law. Lily smiled. And what did he say? He said he would not argue with you. Cain stepped closer. He heard you shot a gun in the town square. A reputation is a useful thing, Lily said. Cain reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. He placed it on the table. For the house, he said awkwardly. Lily unwrapped it. It was a root, a dry, shriveled bulb. It is a lily bulb, Cain explained. Wild, from the high mountains. It survives the frost. It survives the drought. It blooms white, even in the dust. Lily looked at the humble, ugly little root. It was the most romantic thing she had ever seen. It needs to be planted deep, Kane added. If the roots are shallow, the wind takes it. Then we will dig deep, Lily said. She looked at him, and the future stretched out before them. It was not a fairy tale. There would be droughts. There would be hate. There would be days when the gap between their worlds felt impossible to bridge. But as Kane reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch rough and gentle all at once, Lily knew she was home. "Stay for supper?" she asked. "I am not going anywhere," Kane replied. "My horse is tired, and the coffee here is better than in the camp." "Is that the only reason?" Lily teased. Kane leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "No, the company is acceptable. 2. Outside, the sun dipped below the red rocks, casting long shadows across the land that was healing. Slowly, one day at a time, the wind blew through the sagebrush, whispering stories of the past. But for the first time in a long time, the wind did not sound like mourning. It sounded like a beginning. The seasons in the high desert did not change with a whisper. They shifted with the weight of the wind. 5 months had passed since the gunfire in the square of Red Mesa, and the summer heat had finally broken, yielding to the crisp, golden bite of autumn. The cottonwood trees along the creek bottom had turned a brilliant yellow, standing like torches against the deep red of the canyon walls. On a plot of land that sat precariously between the edge of the town's growing grid and the open, wild expanse of the reservation, a new structure had risen. It was not a fortress, nor was it a claim shack. It was a long, low building made of peeled pine logs and adobe brick, smelling of fresh sawdust and dried sage. Above the door, a modest sign swung in the breeze, Red Mesa Community School and Clinic. Inside, the air was filled with a sound that had been absent from this valley for too long, the sound of voices mixing without anger. Lillian Hart stood at the front of the room, wiping chalk dust from her hands. She wore a dress of sturdy blue linen, practical and worn at the elbows, her hair braided back in a style that was half Philadelphia propriety and half Navajo utility. "Now," she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room, "who can tell me the word for water in English? And then in dine." A small hand shot up. It belonged to Thomas, the son of the town blacksmith. Sitting next to him, sharing a slate, was a Navajo boy named Ashki. "Water," Thomas said proudly. "2," Ashki added, grinning. Lily smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Excellent. And remember, water is life, in both languages." Through the open door that connected the schoolroom to the clinic, Ada Yazzie was grinding dried willow bark in a stone mortar. The clinic smelled of antiseptic carbolic acid and sweetgrass, a blend of 2 medicines. A young woman from the town, the wife of a miner, sat nervously on a stool while Ada examined a burn on her arm. "It will blister," Ada said, her voice calm and authoritative. "But if you keep the poultice wet, it will not scar. The land heals, if you let it." The woman nodded, her eyes wide. 6 months ago, she would have crossed the street to avoid Ada. Today. She took the jar of salve and whispered, "Thank you." Lily walked to the window and looked out. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the yard. A rider was approaching from the west. Even at this distance, by the set of his shoulders and the fluid way he moved with the horse, she knew who it was. Kane Yazzie. He was no longer the fugitive haunting the cliffs. He wore a clean shirt of gray flannel and a leather vest, a silver badge pinned discreetly to the fabric. It was not a marshal's star. It was a badge commissioned by the territorial governor, designating him as a federal guide and liaison. He rode up to the hitching rail and dismounted. The Mustang, the same beast that had carried them through the storm, nickered softly as he tied the reins. Kane walked up the steps, his boots thudding heavily on the wood. He took off his hat, revealing eyes that were still watchful, still guarded, but no longer hunted. "Good evening, teacher," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Lily's chest. "Good evening, guide." Lily replied, leaning against the doorframe. Did the survey team give you any trouble? They wanted to cross the Spider Rock Wash, Kane said, dusting sand from his sleeves. They said it was a shortcut for the telegraph line. I told them the ground there is soft and the spirits are angry. I told them if they dug there, the poles would fall by winter. And did they believe you? They believed the part about the soft ground, Kane said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The spirits, they can deal with later, but the line is moving 5 miles south. The sacred ground stays untouched. That is a victory, Lily said softly. It is a compromise, Kane corrected, but he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. But I am learning that compromise is better than a grave. The wedding, when it happened 2 weeks later, was not the society event of the decade. There were no invitations printed on cardstock, no organ music, and no silk veil imported from Paris. It took place at twilight, on a ridge overlooking the valley where the colors of the earth shifted from burning orange to deep purple. They stood within a circle of stones, a tradition Ada had insisted upon. A small fire crackled in the center, the smoke rising straight up into the still air. Old Ben Crowley stood as a witness, wearing a suit that smelled of mothballs and a clean shave that made him look 10 years younger. He held a Bible in his trembling hands. Next to him stood Ada, holding a basket of corn pollen. There were only a dozen guests. Colonel Blackwood had ridden out from the fort, standing stiff and respectful. A few of the Navajo elders sat on blankets, their faces weathered and impassive. The blacksmith and his wife stood awkwardly but kindly near the back. Lily wore a dress of cream-colored calico, stitched with a pattern of wild roses she had embroidered herself. She held a bouquet of sage and late-blooming asters. Kane wore his best buckskins, cleaned and brushed, with a turquoise necklace that had belonged to his father resting against his chest. He looked like a king of the high desert, proud, formidable, and terrified. Ben cleared his throat. "We are gathered here," he began, his voice raspy but loud, "under the eyes of God in the sky, to join this man and this woman. They have walked through fire to get here. I reckon if anyone has earned a bit of peace, it is them." He looked at Kane. "Do you—" "Kane Yazzie, take this woman." Kane looked at Lily. He saw the woman who had shot a gun in the square. He saw the woman who had held him in the dark when the thunder shook the cabin. He saw the only person in the world who knew his whole name and did not fear it. "I take her," Kane said, his voice steady. "I take her heart. I take her to a fight. I take her silence." Ben looked at Lily. "And do you, Lillian Hart, take this man?" "I take him," Lily said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I take his past. I take his land. I take his gentleness and his roughness." Ada stepped forward. She sprinkled corn pollen over their joined hands, a blessing for the path ahead. "May you walk in beauty," Ada whispered in Dine. Then, in English, "May there be beauty before you. May there be beauty behind you." They did not exchange gold rings. Instead, Kane pulled a leather cord from his pocket. On it hung a small, polished piece of red sandstone, smoothed by the river, with a vein of silver running through it. He tied it around Lily's neck. "Earth and silver," he murmured, tying the knot. "Two worlds, one stone." Lily reached up and touched his face, pulling him down for a kiss. It was not a polite, chaste peck. It was a kiss that tasted of smoke and promise, a seal on a contract written in blood and survival. As they broke apart, the sun slipped below the horizon, and the first star appeared, the evening star, watching over the west. Their home was a small cabin built on a rise of land that looked down the throat of the valley. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a wide porch, but it was sturdy. Inside, the walls told the story of their union. On one wall hung a large, hand-woven Navajo rug, its geometric patterns telling a story of rain and harvest in bold reds and blacks. Opposite it, framed in glass, hung the map of the territory, not the fraudulent one Rourke had made, but a new one, drawn by Lily's own hand, marking the water sources, the grazing lands, and the boundaries that protected them both. Books were stacked on rough-hewn shelves, Shakespeare next to ledgers of sheep counts. A rifle hung over the mantelpiece, cleaned and oiled. Below a tintype photograph of Lily's mother. By the front door, in a clay pot, grew a single cactus, and blooming from its prickly heart was a flower, a desert lily, white and resilient. But a house was not a shield. The world outside their door was still hard. They rode into town one Saturday to buy flour and coffee. As they walked down the boardwalk, Kane's hand resting lightly on the small of her back, the silence followed them. A group of new miners, fresh from the east and full of whiskey and prejudice, stood outside the saloon. "Look at that," one of them sneered, loud enough to be heard. "A white flower in the dirt. Shame to see a lady stoop so low." Kane stiffened. His stride faltered, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. The old instinct the warrior's need to answer an insult with blood surged in his veins. Lily stopped. She did not look at the ground. She did not hurry past. She turned slowly, her skirt swishing in the dust, and looked the miner in the eye. Her gaze was cool, analytical, and utterly dismissing. "It is a shame," Lily said, her voice cutting through the dry air like a razor. "It is a shame that you have been in this territory for a week, sir, and you still do not know who holds the water rights to the creek you drink from. If you did, you would tip your hat to my husband." The miner blinked, confused by the sudden shift from insult to economics. "Come, Kane," Lily said, turning her back on the man. "We have business." She took Kane's arm, her grip firm. They walked away, leaving the men muttering in the dust. Later, as they rode back toward the cabin, Kane was quiet. The tension radiated from his shoulders. "I should have broken his jaw," Kane said finally, staring straight ahead. "And then you would be the savage they think you are," Lily said calmly. "And Marshal Boone's replacement would have to arrest you, and I would have to bake a cake with a file in it to break you out." Kane looked at her, and the anger in his chest began to loosen. "You would bake a terrible cake." "I would," Lily agreed. "I am a much better lawyer than a baker." "It is hard," Kane admitted, his voice low, "to hear them speak of you that way." "Let them speak," Lily said, looking at the vast, open sky. "Their words are wind. They blow over. We are the rock. We stay." It was late November when the storm came. It was not a summer thunderstorm, quick and violent, but a winter front, heavy and gray, rolling down from the mountains with the promise of snow. Lightning flashed, illuminating the interior of the cabin in stark bursts of white light. Thunder shook the floorboards, rattling the teacups on the table. Lily sat in the rocking chair by the fire, mending a tear in Kane's shirt. Kane stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. The storm brought back memories, the smell of wet wool, the fear of the chase, the desperation of that night in the trapper's shack. He turned from the window and looked at her. The firelight played across her face, softening the lines of fatigue around her eyes. She looked up and caught his gaze. She smiled, a slow, teasing smile. "You look ready to fight the thunder." "Kane," she said. "The thunder is loud tonight," Kane murmured, walking over to her. He knelt beside her chair, resting his arm on the armrest. "It reminds me of the night I almost lost you on the cliff." "You did not lose me," Lily said, putting down her needle. She ran her fingers through his dark, heavy hair. "You caught me. I was rough with you," Kane said, the old guilt surfacing. "I dragged you through the dirt. I tied your hands. I told you." "You told me the West does not do gentle," Lily finished for him, her voice soft. Kane took her hand, turning it over to kiss the palm. His lips were warm against her skin. "It does not," Kane said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "The wind is sharp. The sun burns. The rocks cut. It is a world of teeth and claws." He looked up at her, his dark eyes wide open, stripping away the warrior's mask to reveal the man beneath vulnerable, devoted, and deeply in love. "But I can try," he said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "I can try to be gentle with you, Lily, in a world that is not gentle. I can be your soft place. Lily felt a lump rise in her throat. This man, who had walked the long walk, who had killed to protect her, who carried the weight of a displaced people on his shoulders, was offering her the only thing he had withheld from the world, his softness. You are, she whispered, leaning down to cup his face. You are the only peace I have ever known. She pulled him up, and he lifted her from the chair. He carried her to the bed in the corner of the room, not with the frantic desperation of their first time, but with a slow, deliberate reverence. Outside, the wind howled and the sleet hammered against the roof, a symphony of the wild, untamed frontier. But inside, under the heavy wool blankets, there was warmth. There was the slow, steady rhythm of two hearts beating in time. There was a gentleness that defied the desert, a private, sacred space they had carved out of the wilderness, just for each other. The story ends not in darkness, but in light. It was a crisp morning, the sky a piercing, impossible blue. Snow dusted the tops of the red cliffs, looking like powdered sugar on raw meat. Cain and Lily rode their horses to the highest point of the red mesa. They stopped at the edge of the precipice, looking down at the valley below. From this height, the scars on the land were visible, the lines of the fences, the cut of the railroad track in the distance. But the healing was visible, too. The smoke rising from the hogans in the north, the green patch of the schoolyard, the herds of sheep moving like clouds across the sagebrush. The wind whipped Lily's hair across her face. She brushed it back, taking a deep breath of the thin, cold air. She felt free. Not the freedom of a bird that flies away, but the freedom of a tree that has struck roots deep enough to withstand the storm. Cain sat on his Mustang beside her. He did not look at her. He looked at the land he loved. But his hand reached out, seeking hers. She took it. His grip was firm, warm, and constant. They did not speak. There was no need for speeches. The choice had been made, again and again. In every sunrise they watched together. In every meal they shared, in every glance that said, I am here, I stay. They were no longer the lonely warrior and the bartered bride. They were Cain and Lily. They were the bridge. They were the guardians of the mesa. Cain squeezed her hand, a silent signal. Lily nodded. Together. They turned their horses away from the edge, not retreating, but riding forward along the ridge, side by side, two silhouettes against the vast, endless sky of the American West. They rode toward home. Thank you, dear reader, for riding this trail with me. I hope the dust of Red Mesa and the story of Cain and Lily have found a place in your heart. It has been a long journey from the stagecoach wreckage to the quiet cabin on the ridge, and I am grateful you stayed in the saddle until the sun went down. I would love to hear your voice by the campfire. Please leave a comment below and tell me, where are you listening to this story from? Are you in the city, like Lily was, or out in the wild, like Cain? Let's share our thoughts and keep the spirit of the West alive. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give the video a like, and if you really felt the spirit of the frontier, hit that hype button to help this story ride further and reach more listeners. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.